Picture this: a hot, dusty day in China, early in the 20th century. An archaeologist kneels in the earth, his hands carefully brushing away the dirt of centuries. His fingers touch something hard, something unexpected. It's not a piece of pottery or a common tool. It's a fragment of bone darkened with age. But as the dust clears, he sees it: a delicate, intricate script carved into its surface, a language no one alive can read. In that quiet moment, he has no idea that he is holding one of the most extraordinary keys to the past ever discovered. He is looking at an oracle bone, and etched into its surface are the direct, whispered messages of a forgotten world. These aren't just ancient artifacts, they are a direct line to a civilization's soul. Known as oracle bones, these fragments of ox scapulae and turtle plastrons are the oldest surviving form of Chinese writing. But they are so much more than historical records. They contain the urgent, desperate questions of kings and diviners from the Shang Dynasty, a powerful realm that ruled over 3,000 years ago. Think about that for a moment. We are about to read the mail of a lost empire. We will see their deepest fears about drought and war, their most profound hopes for bountiful harvests and healthy heirs, their very conversations with the gods and ancestors they believed controlled their fate. This is the secret of the oracle bone messages, a code that, once cracked, didn't just reveal dates and names. It resurrected an entire civilization from myth and brought it roaring back into the light of history. So how do we begin to unravel such an incredible mystery? The journey to decode these ancient texts is a detective story spanning continents and generations, filled with brilliant breakthroughs and frustrating dead ends. It's a puzzle that challenged the world's greatest minds, forcing them to think like Shang Dynasty priests and see the world through the eyes of people who look to the cracks in a burned tortoise shell for divine guidance. We are going to follow that trail of clues, from that first moment of discovery in the field to the stunning revelations that rewrote the history books. Get ready to step into a world of oracle bones, where every inscribed character is a piece of a grander story, a story of human ambition, divine communication, and the timeless desire to understand our place in the universe. This is a journey into the heart of one of history's greatest enigmas. To truly grasp the significance of these artifacts, we need to understand what we're actually looking at. An oracle bone is, at its most fundamental level, a tool for divination, a ritual object used to ask questions of the divine. The most common materials were the shoulder blades of oxen, known as scapulae, and the flat undersides of turtle shells called plastrons. These weren't chosen at random. In the worldview of the Shang Dynasty, turtles were seen as creatures of great mystical power, capable of bridging the earthly and spiritual realms because of their long lifespans and their habitat moving between land and water. Oxen, being large, powerful sacrificial animals, also carried immense ritual significance. The Shang people believed these specific materials could act as a perfect conduit, a sacred telephone line to the gods and ancestors who governed their world. After being carefully selected, these bones and shells underwent an elaborate preparation process. They were smoothed, polished, and had hollows carved into the back. During a divination ceremony, a royal diviner, often the king himself, would pose a critical question to the ancestors or a high god like Dai, the supreme deity. The question could be about virtually any matter of state or royal concern. Will the harvest be plentiful this season? Should we launch a military campaign against a neighboring tribe? Is the upcoming 10-day cycle auspicious? Will the queen's childbirth be successful? Then, a specially trained priest would apply intense heat to one of the prepared hollows using a hot metal rod. The thermal shock caused the bone to crack on the opposite side. It was the pattern of these cracks, their length, direction, and shape, that the diviners interpreted as the answer from the spirit world. A fortunate crack meant yes, an unlucky pattern meant no. But here is where these objects transcend mere ritual and become one of humanity's most precious historical records. The king or his scribes would then meticulously carve the details of this entire event directly onto the bone or shell. This inscription, known as the plastomancy text, is what we call the oracle bone script. They would record the date, often using the ancient Chinese cycle of 60 days. They would write down the name of the diviner. Most importantly, they would inscribe the question itself, the charge. Sometimes they even went a step further, carving the prognostication, the king's interpretation of the crack, and then, days or weeks later, the actual outcome. The crack was read as auspicious for hunting, the inscription might say, followed by, and indeed we captured 150 deer. This creates a complete record, a dated and verified entry from a royal logbook that is over 3,000 years old. Physically handling one today, you would be struck by its texture, smooth yet brittle, stained dark from millennia in the earth and often bearing the soot from the fire that created its prophetic cracks. The script itself is not like modern Chinese writing. It is archaic and angular, with characters that are often startlingly pictographic. You can see the sun as a circle with a dot in the center, a horse with its mane flying, a man kneeling in submission. This makes them not only historical documents but also masterpieces of early calligraphy, each one a unique and handcrafted piece of art. So when we talk about oracle bones, we are not discussing simple animal remains. We are holding the solidified thoughts, fears, and administrative records of a long-vanished court. They are the ultimate royal hotline, a direct and desperate connection to the powers that these ancient people believed shaped their destiny, forever frozen in time and bone. For decades, these priceless historical treasures had been quietly circulating in the markets of Beijing, completely anonymous and utterly misunderstood. They were known to local apothecaries and traditional medicine practitioners as dragon bones. Ground into a fine, potent powder and mixed into remedies, they were sold as a cure for everything from dysentery to wounds, believed to hold the vital essence of a mythical creature. Countless bones inscribed with the secrets of the Shang kings were consumed in this way, dissolved in water and swallowed, their messages lost forever. The rescue of these artifacts from literal oblivion hinges on a single, fateful day in 1899 and a man named Wang Yirong. Wang Yirong was not an archaeologist. He was a distinguished scholar, a high-ranking official in the Shang Dynasty, and a passionate antiquarian with a particular interest in ancient bronze inscriptions. The story goes that he was suffering from a bout of malaria, and a servant was sent to a local pharmacy to fetch ingredients for a remedy, which included these very dragon bones. When the bones arrived, Wang, with a scholar's keen eye, noticed something extraordinary on their surface. They were not smooth, they were covered in what looked like deliberate, systematic carvings. His illness was completely forgotten as he bent over these fragments, his mind racing. He immediately recognized that these marks were not random scratches. They were a form of ancient writing, far older and more archaic than anything he had ever seen on the bronze vessels he collected. Imagine the scene in his study. He holds a piece of bone that was moments away from being crushed into medicine, a substance meant to heal a single body. And in his hands, he realizes it possesses the power to heal an entire nation's understanding of its own past. He saw the pictographic nature of the characters, the same kind of stylized representations of objects and ideas found in the most ancient Chinese scripts. He knew with a scholar's certainty that this was an epoch-making discovery. He immediately rushed back to the pharmacy, desperate to find the source and acquire every single inscribed fragment the druggist had. He reportedly paid a premium for them, saving them from the mortar and pestle and bringing them into the light of scholarly scrutiny for the very first time. Tragically, Wang Yirong's own story was cut short. In 1900, during the violent turmoil of the Boxer Rebellion, he and his wife chose to commit suicide rather than surrender to foreign forces. His life ended just as this new field of study was beginning, but his legacy was secure. His brilliant, serendipitous observation created a ripple effect among fellow Chinese scholars and collectors. The race was on. They began scouring pharmacies across northern China, piecing together fragments and sharing rubbings of the inscriptions. They started the painstaking work of trying to read this forgotten language, a task that would consume the next generation. In a twist of historical irony, the very practice of traditional medicine that nearly destroyed these artifacts also preserved them. The dry, sterile environment of the apothecary jars had kept the bones in remarkably good condition for centuries. So, we owe the very existence of this field of study to a sick scholar's sharp eye, and the incredible luck that brought those specific bones to his door, a moment where history itself was snatched from the jaws of a medicine bowl and given a second chance to speak. So who were the people obsessed with these rituals, the civilization that spoke to us through these fragments of bone and shell? To answer that, we have to travel back to the Yellow River Valley over 3,000 years ago to a kingdom known as the Shang Dynasty. For centuries, the Shang existed more in legend than in proven history, mentioned in later texts as China's second dynasty, but lacking the solid evidence that would satisfy modern historians. That all changed with the oracle bones. They didn't just confirm the Shang were real, they gave us a front row seat to their vibrant, complex, and often brutal world, a society that flourished from around 1600 to 1046 BCE and became the first Chinese dynasty with a fully corroborated archaeological record. Imagine a Bronze Age civilization of immense power and sophistication, centered in a network of large, walled cities. The heart of this kingdom was its capital, a place we now call Yingzhou, near the modern city of Anyang. This was not a primitive settlement. It was a sprawling metropolitan center with royal palaces, elaborate tombs for kings, workshops for skilled bronze casters, and residential districts for a stratified society. The Shang were master metallurgists. They perfected the art of casting bronze to create not just weapons of war, razor-sharp daggers, axes, and spearheads that secured their military dominance, but also breathtaking ceremonial vessels. These intricately decorated cauldrons, goblets, and wine pots were used in rituals to honor ancestors, and they stand today as some of the most magnificent bronze artworks ever produced. This was a society that combined raw power with profound spiritual and artistic expression. At the absolute apex of this society sat the king. He was far more than a political leader. He was the supreme high priest, the crucial intermediary between the human world and the spirit realm. The Shang worldview was a delicate and precarious one. They believed their lives were governed by a host of supernatural forces, a high god known as Dai, who controlled natural phenomena and the fate of the kingdom, and a pantheon of nature gods representing the sun, the moon, the rivers, and the wind. But even more immediate were the king's own ancestors. The Shang practiced a form of ancestor worship based on the conviction that the spirits of past kings and queens retained the power to influence the lives of their descendants. A displeased ancestor could curse the kingdom with famine, disease, or military defeat, while a happy one could bestow blessings and victory. This belief system is the entire reason the oracle bones exist. The king wasn't just casually curious about the future. His very legitimacy and the kingdom's survival depended on his ability to correctly interpret the will of these powerful spirits. Every major decision was vetted through the cracks in a tortoise shell. Should we plant the crops now? Will the harvest be good? Is it the right time to go to war against the Qiang tribe? Will the queen's childbirth be safe? The answers to these questions, delivered through plastromancy, dictated state policy, agricultural cycles, and military campaigns. The ritual was the administration. The king's role as the chief diviner made him the central pillar holding up the entire cosmic order, cementing his political power through his unique spiritual authority. This was a theocracy in its purest form, where the state and the spirit world were one and the same, and the humble turtle shell was the channel through which they communicated. Now, let's step into the ritual chamber itself and witness the divination process, the moment when human anxiety met divine will. This was not a casual ceremony performed in a quiet corner. It was a highly formalized state event, a dramatic performance choreographed to compel an answer from the gods. The entire process began with a pressing concern, a question of absolute importance to the king and the stability of his realm. Imagine the weight of that moment. A military campaign hangs in the balance, the rains have not come, or the queen is in labor. The fate of thousands could rest on the message hidden within a piece of bone. First came the preparation of the question, known as the charge. The king or his chief diviner would formulate a precise, binary inquiry, almost always structured to be answered with a simple yes or no. For instance, the charge would not be a vague, "What will the weather be like?" but a direct, "On the next day, will it rain?" Or, "Is the drought caused by the displeasure of our ancestor, King Dayi?" These questions reveal the core anxieties of a Bronze Age monarchy: warfare, agriculture, the king's health, the success of the hunt, the movements of the stars, and the mood of the ancestors. Each query was a snapshot of a crisis or a critical decision point, carved with purpose onto the waiting surface. With the question firmly in mind, the physical ritual commenced. The diviner, a figure of immense authority and ritual purity, would take the prepared bone or plastron. These hollows, meticulously drilled and chiseled into rows on the back of the shell, were not random pits. They were often arranged in an orderly grid, a testament to the highly systematic nature of Shang spirituality. A specially crafted bronze rod, heated in a furnace until it glowed, was then applied with precision to the edge of one of these hollows. The sound must have been sharp, a sudden crack echoing in the ceremonial space as the thermal shock traveled through the dense material, producing a network of fissures on the opposite, polished side. This was the climax of the ritual. The bone was speaking. Interpreting these cracks was an art form in itself, a skill that defined the diviner's power. The diviner would lean close, studying the length, direction, and shape of the primary crack and its smaller tributaries. A long, straight crack might signal an auspicious yes, while a forked or jagged line could be seen as an inauspicious no. Some scholars believe the diviners may have even carved small notches to guide the path of the fracture, subtly influencing the divine response to align with the king's desires. The interpretation was then declared, and the king's prognostication, his official reading of the omen, was often carved right next to the original question. But the process didn't always end there. The Shang were practical record keepers. In many cases, days, weeks, or even months later, a scribe would return to the very same bone and add a final, crucial notation, the verification. This postscript, known as the result, confirmed whether the prediction had come true. We find chillingly direct entries like, "The crack was read as auspicious for hunting. We captured 150 deer," or the starkly tragic, "Crack making on Gui Sea Day, que divined, the king's childbearing wife will have a lucky birth." The king read the cracks and said, "If it be on a Ding day, it will be lucky. If it be on a Zheng day, there will be prolonged luck." After 31 days, on Jia Yin Day, she gave birth. It was not lucky, it was a girl. This creates an incredible feedback loop, a continuous calibration of their entire belief system against the hard reality of their lived experience, all documented for eternity on a single, fragile piece of turtle shell. Now, we move from the ritual itself to the very words it left behind, the inscribed messages that form our oldest window into the Chinese language. This script, often called oracle bone script or pyromantic script for its connection to the fire-cracking ritual, is far more than ancient graffiti. It is a complete, sophisticated writing system, the earliest confirmed form of Chinese writing, and the direct, undeniable ancestor of the characters used by over 1 billion people today. Understanding its structure is the key to unlocking the thoughts of the Shang people. A typical inscription is a remarkably logical record. usually divided into distinct sections that read almost like a formal scientific report. First, you have the preface, which states the date of the divination and the name of the diviner, often a royal official or the king himself. Then comes the central element, the charge. This is the burning question posed to the spirits, carved into the bone for eternity. But the most fascinating part, the part that gives these artifacts such stunning historical veracity, is the verification. This was a later addition, a postscript carved sometimes weeks or months after the original ritual, confirming whether the omen had proven true or false. To see the power of this structure, let's look at a real-world example. Imagine a bone inscribed with a charge that reads, "Crack making on Jia Wu Day, Zheng divined. In the next 10 days, there will be no misfortune." This was a standard, almost routine check-in with the cosmos, a way to ensure the coming cycle would be safe. Now, imagine that a few days into that 10-day period, a neighboring tribe launches a surprise raid, killing villagers and stealing grain. A scribe would then return to that very same bone and add the verification, which might starkly state, "On the 5th day, disaster, the Qiang tribe attacked." This creates a powerful and honest record. It shows the Shang weren't just blindly recording their hopes, they were diligently tracking the accuracy of their divinations, creating a feedback loop between their spiritual beliefs and the hard, often brutal, reality of their world. This verification process transforms the bones from mere religious artifacts into the world's oldest documented experiments in prophecy. The script itself is a beautiful and complex system, a blend of pictographic and logographic principles. Pictographs are pictures of the things they represent, and the oracle bone script is filled with them. The character for sun is a circle with a dot in the center. Moon is a crescent shape, mountain shows 3 peaks, rain depicts falling drops from a cloud. Horse is a magnificent, stylized drawing of the animal, complete with a flowing mane and 4 legs. You can look at these characters and immediately grasp their meaning, a direct visual link to the world the Shang inhabited, but a language cannot function on pictures alone. This is where logographs come in. A logograph represents a word or a concept itself, not just the object. For instance, the character for good or auspicious shows a ritual vessel, a symbol of offerings and therefore of divine favor. The character for to divine shows cracks appearing on a bone. These abstract concepts required symbolic representation, demonstrating the script's advanced development. What is truly breathtaking is tracing the evolutionary line from these ancient forms to the modern characters we know today. That circle with a dot for sun has streamlined and squared off into the modern character Chinese letter. The crescent moon has become a vertical rectangle Chinese letter. The 3 mountain peaks have flattened into a single, elegant form Chinese letter. This unbroken lineage, stretching across more than 3,000 years, is almost unparalleled in human history. When a person literate in Chinese looks at an oracle bone inscription, they are not looking at a foreign language, they are looking at the deeply ancestral form of their own writing. This continuity provides a cultural thread connecting the modern world directly to the court of the Shang kings, a tangible link that makes the distant past feel immediate and personal. Deciphering this script, however, was a monumental task that required a combination of brilliant intuition and meticulous scholarship. Early pioneers in the field, like the scholar Wang Yirong, made groundbreaking progress by using a method later termed dual evidence. They would take a character from an oracle bone and compare it to the more standardized scripts found on ancient Shang Dynasty bronze vessels, which were often easier to read. Once they identified a character there, they would then cross-reference it with the names of kings and places mentioned in later historical texts like the Bamboo Annals or records of the Grand Historian. This triangulation allowed them to crack the code. For example, they noticed a particular character complex that appeared frequently in the inscriptions. By matching its shape to bronzes and its context to the historical king lists, they confirmed it was the name of the legendary Shang king, Wu Ding. This single decipherment was like finding a Rosetta Stone. It provided a fixed point, a known historical figure around which all other characters could begin to orbit and find their meaning. The code was cracked not by a single genius, but by the patient, collective work of scholars piecing together a puzzle written in fire and bone. With this newfound ability to read their words, the oracle bones transform from abstract artifacts into something profoundly intimate, the personal diary of a king. Imagine holding a 3,000-year-old journal, but instead of private reflections, its pages are cracked turtle shells, and its entries are direct pleas to the gods. This is precisely what we have. The range of questions posed by the Shang kings is breathtaking in its scope, covering every facet of their existence from matters of state to the most personal bodily concerns. It reveals a ruler who saw his entire world, the cosmic and the commonplace, as being under the direct supervision of his ancestors. Let's begin with the foundational concerns of a Bronze Age monarchy: agriculture and warfare. These were the pillars of the state, and the king's divinations about them were constant and urgent. He would ask, "In the coming 10-day week, will we receive a good harvest of millet?" The success of the staple crop meant the difference between a prosperous kingdom and widespread famine. Similarly, military threats were a perpetual anxiety. The inscriptions are filled with questions about the Tufang or the Qiang tribes, nomadic groups that frequently raided Shang settlements. A king might inquire, "If we raise 3,000 troops and attack the Tufang, will we receive assistance from Dai, the high god?" Or, more simply, is the Qiang tribe planning an invasion? The answers to these questions determine the mobilization of armies and the very security of the realm, showing a leader grappling with the same fundamental pressures of statecraft that rulers have faced throughout history. But the king's divine inquiries didn't stop at the borders of his kingdom or the edges of his fields. They extended directly into the most private spaces of the royal household. The health and continuity of the royal lineage were paramount, and childbirth was a moment of extreme peril and profound importance. We find incredibly specific entries like, "Lady How will give birth." Will it be fortunate? The verification on this particular bone is a stark reminder of the era's realities. After 31 days, she gave birth. It was not lucky. It was a girl. This single sentence carries the weight of a personal tragedy set against the harsh demands of a patrilineal dynasty. The king's own body was also a subject of divine concern. We have inscriptions that read, "The king has a toothache. Is it due to the displeasure of Father Jia?" This reveals a world view where even a physical ailment was not a random medical event, but a potential message from a disgruntled ancestor, a symptom of spiritual disharmony that required ritual appeasement. Beyond the predictable concerns of state and health, the inscriptions open a window onto the psychological world of the Shang king, a place where dreams and omens held tangible power. The ancient mind did not dismiss a nightmare as mere subconscious noise. It was a potential communication from the spirit world. A king might wake from a disturbing dream and immediately turn to his diviners, asking, "I dreamed of a turtle. Was this an auspicious omen?" Or, "Last night I dreamed of a flood. Will there be misfortune?" These questions show a leader who was not just a political and military commander, but also the chief interpreter of his kingdom's subconscious, tasked with decoding the symbolic language of the gods as it played out in his own sleeping mind. This adds a deeply human layer to our understanding of him, a man lying awake at night, troubled by visions, seeking answers in the sacred cracks of a bone. Perhaps one of the most captivating categories of questions revolves around the rituals themselves and the natural world. The king was locked in a constant cycle of giving to receive, and the details were a matter for divination. He would ask, "Should we perform a sacrifice to ancestry with 10 slaughtered sheep? Or, if we offer 3 cattle and 5 pigs to the river spirit, will it stop the flooding?" This was a form of divine negotiation, an attempt to determine the correct price for cosmic favor. Even the weather, that most uncontrollable of forces, was a constant subject. Will there be a drought this year? On the day Bing Wu, will the wind bring rain? These were not casual inquiries about whether to carry an umbrella. They were desperate attempts to understand and influence the forces that sustained or destroyed their agricultural society. Taken together, these thousands of inscribed questions form a mosaic of a complete life. From the success of the next day's hunt to the meaning of a strange dream, from the pain of a toothache to the outcome of a battle, the king brought everything to the oracle. This was not a sign of weakness or indecision, but the very essence of his role. He was the nexus where heaven and earth met, and his duty was to maintain the balance. Reading these inscriptions, we don't just learn about ancient rituals, we come to know the man. We feel the weight of his crown, the depth of his fears, and the breadth of his responsibilities, all etched forever into the surface of a bone, creating one of history's most raw and unfiltered royal diaries. The world of the Shang, as reflected in the oracle bones, was not a lonely one. It was a cosmos teeming with powerful, invisible personalities whose moods and whims dictated the fate of the entire kingdom. To understand their messages, we must first understand the spiritual hierarchy they inhabited, a divine bureaucracy that mirrored the royal court itself. At the very apex of this supernatural order sat a figure of immense, often unpredictable power, the high god known as Dai, or sometimes Shangdi, the Lord on high. Dai was not a god who concerned himself with the daily minutiae of human life. He was a cosmic executive, a celestial king who controlled the grand, sweeping forces of nature and destiny. The oracle bone inscriptions show the Shang kings directing their most urgent questions to him, especially concerning matters of warfare and weather. They would ask, will Dai send down disaster upon our city? Or, if we launch a campaign against the Tufang, will Dai confer victory upon us? Unlike the king's ancestors, Dai was never referred to with familial terms. There was no sense that he was a literal forefather. He was a remote, sovereign authority, a force to be petitioned and placated but never commanded. His favor was essential for large-scale success, but his disfavor could bring ruin that no ancestor could prevent. Beneath this supreme deity existed a whole pantheon of nature spirits, each governing a specific part of the physical world. These were the gods of the rivers, the mountains, the wind, and the sun. The Shang saw the natural world as alive with divine agency. A devastating flood was not just a weather event, it was the anger of the river spirit. A prolonged drought might be the work of the wind spirit or a sign of displeasure from the earth spirit. We see the king making direct offerings to these entities, attempting to negotiate with the very landscape. An inscription might question, should we perform a sacrifice to the river spirit with 3 cattle and 5 prisoners of war? This reveals a world where geography itself was sacred and had to be managed with the same careful diplomacy as a neighboring tribe. These nature deities were powerful bureaucrats in the cosmic government, and securing their cooperation was a critical part of maintaining the balance of the world. But the most immediate, the most constant, and in many ways the most demanding figures in the Shang spiritual landscape were the king's own ancestors. The belief was that upon death, the souls of past kings and their consorts transitioned into powerful spirits who retained a direct interest in the affairs of their living descendants. This was not a vague, sentimental form of remembrance. It was a practical, transactional relationship. The ancestors had the ability to intercede with Dai and the nature gods on the kingdom's behalf. They could bring bountiful harvests, ensure military victories, and protect the royal family from harm. However, they could also become displeased, and a displeased ancestor was the most common source of calamity identified in the oracle bones. Think of it as a divine patronage system. The living king provided a constant stream of offerings, food, wine, and most significantly, animal and sometimes human sacrifices to sustain his ancestors in the spirit world. In return, the ancestors provided protection and blessings. If the offerings were insufficient, incorrect, or late, the ancestors would withdraw their support and actively punish the kingdom. The range of problems attributed to a specific angry ancestor is astonishingly broad. The king might divine, is the queen's illness caused by Father Yi? Or is this year's poor harvest due to the displeasure of ancestor Xin? Even a king's toothache could be interpreted as a targeted message from a neglected forebear. This created a state of perpetual spiritual vigilance. Every misfortune, from a personal ailment to a national disaster, triggered a frantic investigative process using the oracle bones to identify which ancestor was responsible and what specific offering would appease them. This system placed the king in an incredibly powerful yet profoundly stressful position. He was the sole conduit, the chief executive officer of this entire spiritual enterprise. Only he, through the ritual of plastromancy, could diagnose the source of cosmic discontent and prescribe the correct ritual remedy. His unique ability to communicate with the other side was the very foundation of his political legitimacy. A successful king was one who could accurately read the cracks, correctly identify the angry spirit, and successfully restore harmony through sacrifice. A failure to do so would lead to continued misfortune, which could easily be interpreted as a withdrawal of divine mandate. The oracle bones, therefore, were not just religious tools, they were the essential instruments of statecraft. Every crack read, every question carved was an act of governance, a desperate and continuous effort to manage the invisible powers that everyone believed truly held the reins of the kingdom. The messages we read today are the documented minutes of these high-stakes meetings between the visible and invisible worlds, a timeless record of humanity's attempt to find order and meaning in a universe filled with unseen forces. But behind every royal question and divine answer, there was a hand, a skilled, steady human hand holding a sharp tool, pressing it into the resistant surface of a bone or shell. While the king interpreted the cracks and the spirits provided the omens, it was the scribes, the master carvers of the Shang court, who gave these ephemeral moments their permanent voice. These men were the first Chinese writers, the record keepers of destiny, and their work required a blend of artistic brilliance, physical endurance, and deep literacy that speaks volumes about the sophistication of this ancient civilization. The act of inscribing an oracle bone was an immense technical challenge. The primary materials, ox scapulae and turtle plastrons, are incredibly dense and hard. We are not talking about soft clay or smooth wood. This is a surface that can blunt a modern steel tool. The scribes used bronze berens or sharp, hardened stone points to painstakingly incise each character, one tiny groove at a time. It was a slow, deliberate process. They couldn't simply write fluidly. Each stroke required precise pressure and control to avoid slipping or shattering the precious ritual object. You can sometimes see the evidence of this struggle in the inscriptions themselves. A character might start deep and clear, but the line grows shallower as the scribe's hand tired, or a slight miscalculation led to a correction, a second overlapping line trying to perfect a shape. This was not a task for an amateur. It was a highly specialized craft, a form of extreme micro-engraving that transformed a ritual object into an eternal document. What's truly remarkable is that despite this unforgiving medium, these scribes were not mere technicians. They were calligraphers. Scholars who have studied thousands of these inscriptions have identified distinct personal styles in the carving. Think about that for a moment. We can recognize the individual handwriting of scribes who lived over 3 millennia ago. Some scripts are bold and angular, with strong, deep cuts that convey a sense of power and authority. Others are elegant and fine, with slender, almost delicate lines that curve gracefully. Another style might be more compact and utilitarian, prioritizing efficiency and clarity over artistic flourish. These variations tell us that there wasn't a single, rigidly enforced corporate style. Different workshops, or perhaps different master scribes, had their own aesthetic preferences and technical methods. Being able to identify these styles has even helped archaeologists piece together fragmented collections, grouping bones that were clearly inscribed by the same individual. This transforms the scribes from anonymous functionaries into recognizable artists. We may not know their names, but we can see their unique personalities and skills reflected in the very bones they carved, a silent signature of style that has endured through the ages. The existence of such a specialized class of literate artisans forces us to dramatically rethink our image of Shang society. Literacy in the ancient world was almost never a common skill. It was a powerful tool, a form of social capital tightly controlled by the elite. The ability to read and, more importantly, to write this complex pictographic script was not something one picked up casually. It would have required a long and rigorous education, likely passed down within specific families or through a master-apprentice system within the royal court. These scribes were not just carvers, they were scholars and priests in their own right. They had to know the correct formal structure of a divination, record the proper order for the date, the diviner's name, the charge, and the verification. They had to possess a vast vocabulary of characters to accurately record everything from the names of obscure ancestors to the types of sacrificial animals. Their role placed them at the very heart of state power. They were present during the most critical royal rituals, listening to the king's questions and his interpretations, and entrusted with committing these sacred communications to a permanent medium. They were the keepers of the royal archive, the men who made history literal. Consider the profound responsibility of their position. A mistake in the carving was not a simple typo that could be erased. A misplaced character or an incorrect date could potentially misrepresent the divine will, leading to a misguided military campaign or an improper sacrifice that might anger the ancestors. The scribe's work had to be perfect because the stakes were cosmically high. They were, in a very real sense, engraving the official narrative of the kingdom's relationship with the gods. Their inscriptions validated the king's authority, proving to the court and to posterity that he was diligently consulting the spirits and ruling in accordance with their will. This gives us a fascinating glimpse into the bureaucratic machinery of the Shang state. It was not a simple, brute force monarchy. It was a complex administration with specialized roles where the power of the written word was already understood as essential for legitimacy, continuity, and control. The scribes, therefore, stand as crucial figures in Chinese history. They were the vital link in the chain, the ones who transformed the transient voice of the oracle into the permanent voice of history, ensuring that the secrets of the bone messages would one day be heard again. The very surface of these bones holds a secret language, a script so ancient it predates the pyramids of Giza, yet it remains the direct ancestor of the characters used by billions today. This is the oracle bone script, and it functions as a stunning linguistic time capsule, offering us undeniable proof of the incredible antiquity and unbroken continuity of the Chinese writing system. It is not a separate, dead language but the childhood form of modern Chinese, preserved in bone and shell. When you look at these angular, pictographic carvings, you are looking at the root of a literary tradition that stretches back over 3,000 years, a cultural thread connecting the modern world directly to the court of the Shang kings. This direct lineage is almost unparalleled in human history. While other ancient civilizations like Mesopotamia and Egypt developed complex writing, their scripts fell into disuse, their meanings lost for millennia until modern decipherment. Chinese script is unique. It evolved, it streamlined, it was standardized, but it was never wholly replaced. The characters on these oracle bones are the grandparents of the characters in a newspaper printed in Beijing or Taipei today. This continuity provides a tangible link that makes the distant Shang world feel immediate and strangely familiar. To understand its marvel, we must look at the characters themselves, which can be broadly divided into two fascinating categories. The first are the pictographs, which are direct, stylized drawings of the objects they represent. These are the most immediately recognizable and offer a thrilling window into the Shang worldview. The character for sun was originally a circle with a dot in the center, a clear and simple representation of the sun's disk. Over millennia, for ease of writing with a brush, this circle squared off into the modern character Chinese letter. The character for mountain depicted three peaks rising from the earth, an elegant representation of a range of hills, which later simplified into the modern Chinese letter. Rain shows falling drops descending from a cloud. Moon is a beautiful crescent shape which evolved into Chinese letter. And one of the most evocative is the character for horse, which is a magnificent, stylized drawing of the animal in profile, complete with a flowing mane, a distinct back, 4 legs, and a tail. You can look at this 3,000-year-old character and instantly know what it means. It's a direct visual telegram from the past, but a language cannot function on pictures of concrete objects alone. It needs a way to express abstract ideas, actions, and concepts. This is where the second category, the logographs and ideographs, comes in, demonstrating the script's sophisticated and advanced development even at this earliest stage. These characters represent words or ideas themselves, not just the object. For instance, the character for above or ascend is a simple line placed above a dot or a short stroke, visually indicating the concept of up. Conversely, below or descend shows the line beneath the dot. The character for bright, which combines the pictographs for sun and moon, the two brightest objects in the sky, beautifully conveys the idea of brilliance and clarity. The character for to listen or to hear in the oracle bone script is particularly ingenious. It often depicts a large, exaggerated ear next to a smaller figure, sometimes interpreted as a king or a person, emphasizing the act of attentive listening. This symbolic representation of an abstract action shows a leap in linguistic thinking, moving from depicting things to illustrating ideas. This evolutionary journey from the oracle bone script to modern Chinese characters is a story of gradual streamlining and standardization, not of radical reinvention. The rounded, angular lines of the bone inscriptions, which were difficult to carve, naturally gave way to the more fluid, curved strokes of bronze inscriptions cast on ritual vessels. Later, with the widespread use of the writing brush and ink on bamboo slips and silk, the characters evolved further, developing the distinctive thickness and thinness of brush strokes. The most significant standardization occurred under the first emperor of Qin in the 3rd century BCE, who unified the various regional scripts into a single system. Yet, the fundamental principles and the core shapes established on the oracle bones remained the recognizable foundation. This unbroken chain means that a person literate in modern Chinese with some guidance can often puzzle out the meaning of an oracle bone inscription. They might not be able to read the entire text fluently, but they can pick out the sun, the moon, the mountain, the rain, and the horse. This creates a profound sense of connection, a feeling that the thoughts and observations of those ancient scribes are not entirely lost to time, but are merely written in a slightly different dialect of the same visual language. The oracle bone script, therefore, is far more than an archaeological curiosity. It is the living root of Chinese civilization, a testament to the enduring power of the written word to bridge millennia and speak directly to the human heart across the ages. And so we arrive at the very heart of the mystery. The quiet, tense moment after the ceremonial fire has been applied and the sharp crack has echoed through the chamber. The bone has spoken, but in a language of fractures and fissures. Now the diviner, often the king himself, leans in close, his eyes tracing the intricate web of lines that now mar the polished surface. How did he translate this abstract pattern into a clear, actionable answer from the gods? This was the ultimate act of interpretation, a blend of rigid tradition, intuitive insight, and perhaps shrewd political strategy. The crack patterns were not random graffiti from the spirit world. They were a code, and the king held the key. Scholars have long debated the exact system used, and the evidence points to a complex process rather than a single, simple key. One prominent theory suggests that the physical orientation of the crack was paramount. The diviners likely looked for a primary crack, known as the megascopic crack, which would form from the heated hollow. Accompanying this main fracture were smaller, branching lines called divinatory cracks. The relationship between these lines was everything. A long, straight, and dominant megascopic crack might be interpreted as a strong, auspicious yes. Conversely, a crack that was short, forked, or jagged, or one where the branching lines seemed to attack the main line, could be read as an inauspicious no or a warning of impending trouble. The direction of the crack mattered too. A fissure pointing towards a symbol carved on the bone representing the king might be a good omen for him, while one pointing away could signify his plans being thwarted. This system would have required years of training to master, a visual grammar of fortune and misfortune written in the very structure of the bone itself. Yet, was it really that mechanical? Another compelling theory argues that while a basic framework existed, a significant portion of the interpretation was intuitive and situational. Think of a modern-day doctor reading an X-ray. Two radiologists might agree on the fundamental principles of what they're seeing, a shadow, a fracture, a density, but their final diagnosis can be influenced by their experience, their knowledge of the patient's history, and even their own gut feeling. For the Shang diviner, the context of the question would have deeply colored his reading of the cracks. A query about a military campaign posed on the eve of battle would carry a different weight than a routine inquiry about the weather. The pattern of cracks that appeared might be interpreted more favorably if the king was already psychologically committed to the war, or more ominously if he had lingering doubts. The diviner wasn't just a passive decoder, he was an active interpreter, filtering the divine signal through the lens of immediate human circumstance. This intuitive layer transforms the ritual from a simple yes or no machine into a profound dialogue, where the human participants' own wisdom and fears became part of the cosmic conversation. This leads us to the most controversial and fascinating possibility, that the interpretation was not always a pure search for divine truth, but could be a carefully staged piece of political theater. The king's authority rested on his unique ability to correctly communicate with the ancestors. It is not difficult to imagine a scenario where the correct answer was already known, and the ritual served to sanctify a decision that had effectively already been made. How could this be manipulated? The diviners had some control over the process from the very start. The placement and depth of the hollows carved into the back of the bone could subtly influence the path of the fracture. A shallower hollow or a strategically placed notch might guide the crack in a more predictable and therefore more manageable direction. If the king needed a divine mandate to launch a risky war to consolidate his power, a little ritual engineering could help ensure the bones delivered the right verdict. This doesn't mean every divination was a sham, but it introduces a layer of realpolitik into the sacred ceremony. The oracle bones, in this light, were not just a hotline to the gods, they were a tool of statecraft, a way to present difficult or controversial decisions as the incontrovertible will of heaven, thereby uniting the court and silencing opposition under the banner of divine will. Ultimately, the true genius of the Shang system may lie in its remarkable built-in feedback loop, the verification. This practice of returning to the bone weeks later to record whether the prediction came true provided a continuous calibration of their interpretive methods. If a particular crack pattern was consistently read as auspicious for hunting, and the subsequent hunts repeatedly failed, the diviners would have to adjust their understanding of that pattern. It was a form of empirical science applied to prophecy. They were essentially collecting data, correlating specific crack morphologies with real-world outcomes over generations. This long-term database would have refined their interpretations, weeding out personal bias and incorrect assumptions over time. It created a living tradition where the meaning of the cracks was not entirely set in stone but was honed by experience. This transforms our view of the Shang from superstitious mystics into practical logicians of the supernatural. They believed wholeheartedly in their system, but they also held it accountable to reality. The moment of interpretation, therefore, was the nexus where faith met evidence, where the supposed will of the gods was constantly tested against the unforgiving ledger of harvest yields, battle outcomes, and the health of the royal family. It was in this sacred space, hovering over a cracked turtle shell, that the Shang king performed his most vital duty, reading the whispers of the universe and translating them into a plan for his kingdom, a responsibility that balanced on the fragile, branching edge of a single divine fracture. Now, to really see this remarkable system in action, let's look at a single, deeply human moment from the reign of King Wu Ding, a case study etched in bone that captures the entire Shang worldview in one painful, personal problem: a royal toothache. We have an actual inscription, a record from over 3,000 years ago, that documents the king's distress and the frantic spiritual investigation it launched. It wasn't seen as a simple dental issue, something to be treated with herbs or a poultice. In the mind of King Wu Ding and his court, physical pain was a message, a signal that something was profoundly wrong in the kingdom's relationship with the spirit world. A toothache could be a symptom of a cosmic imbalance, a targeted complaint from a specific, displeased ancestor. So the king did what he always did in a crisis: he turned to the oracle. The question carved into the bone is direct and startlingly personal. The inscription begins with the standard preface, giving us the date and the diviner's name, but then comes the charge, the heart of the matter: the king has a toothache. Is it due to the displeasure of Father Jia? Think about the assumptions packed into that simple question. First, it assumes the pain has an intelligent cause, not a biological one. Second, it identifies a specific suspect from the vast roster of royal ancestors, Father Jia, who was an earlier king from the Shang lineage. This wasn't a random guess. The diviners likely had a protocol, a way of narrowing down which spirit might be responsible based on the nature of the affliction, the timing, or perhaps the king's own dreams. The question itself reveals a world where the boundary between the physical and the spiritual was porous, where an ancestor lingering anger could manifest as a sharp, throbbing pain in the king's jaw. After the heat was applied and the bone cracked, the next step was the prognostication, the king's official interpretation of the omen. The inscription records his verdict. The king read the cracks and said, "It is the displeasure of Father Jia." The cracks in the shell had confirmed his suspicion. The diagnosis was in. The toothache was not a minor medical annoyance, it was a confirmed case of ancestral wrath. This verdict immediately shifted the entire situation. The problem was no longer the pain itself, but the ritual breach that had caused it. The focus turned from treatment to appeasement. The king's role now transformed from a patient into a high priest, tasked with performing the necessary rituals to soothe the angry spirit of Father Jia and restore the cosmic harmony that his toothache had revealed was broken. So, what was the prescription for a toothache caused by a ghost? The solution was a sacrifice. The verification added to the bone later tells us exactly what was done to resolve the crisis. To appease Father Jia, the court performed a ritual offering, a lie sacrifice. This type of sacrifice likely involved the ritual burning of an offering, perhaps of specially prepared meat or ceremonial cakes, sending the essence of the food directly to the ancestor in the spirit world through the medium of smoke and fire. This was not a trivial gesture, it was a formal transaction, the paying of a spiritual debt. The underlying logic was one of reciprocity. The ancestor, feeling neglected, had withdrawn his support and actively harmed the king. By providing a lavish, smoke-borne feast, the king was acknowledging the ancestor's power, reaffirming his devotion, and essentially saying, "We have heard your complaint and are making amends." The success of this ritual was measured not by any immediate medicinal effect on the king's tooth, but by the cessation of the pain. If the toothache went away after the sacrifice, it was definitive proof that the diagnosis had been correct and the remedy effective. This single inscription is a perfect, self-contained story of Shang life. It begins with a physical symptom, leads to a divine interrogation, results in a spiritual diagnosis, and culminates in a ritual cure. It shows us a king who is simultaneously all-powerful and utterly vulnerable, a man who commands armies but must kneel before the cracked shell to understand why his own body aches. For modern viewers, it might seem strange to attribute a toothache to a dead relative, but for the Shang, it was a perfectly logical and comforting explanation. It meant the world was orderly. Pain was not random suffering, it was communication. There was always a reason, and there was always a ritual solution. This case study of a royal toothache does more than just illustrate a divination process. It opens a window into the ancient mind, revealing a universe where every event, no matter how small or personal, was woven into a vast, intelligible tapestry of cause and effect, governed by the ever-watchful, ever-demanding spirits of the past. This transformation of the Shang from legend into documented history is perhaps the single greatest achievement of the oracle bone discoveries. For centuries, the Shang Dynasty was a ghost, a name passed down through later historical texts like Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, but without any physical evidence to prove it was more than a foundational myth. The oracle bones changed everything. They didn't just hint at this ancient kingdom, they provided a dated, verifiable royal roster, a detailed account of its political and military struggles, and even its observations of the cosmos, effectively pulling a civilization out of the shadows and onto the solid ground of history. The most immediate and stunning confirmation came from the king lists. Scholars working with the newly deciphered script began to notice certain character complexes that appeared over and over in the inscriptions, often in contexts associated with ritual offerings and royal prognostications. Through meticulous comparison with the later historical king lists, they made a breathtaking connection. One particular set of characters was identified as the name of the legendary King Wu Ding. Another was matched to King Zhu Jia. One by one, the names carved into the bones aligned with the names recorded by historians writing 1,000 years later. This wasn't just a vague correlation. The order of their reigns, their relationships, and even their posthumous temple names corresponded. The mythical kings had become historical figures with confirmed existence, their rule chronicled not by later chroniclers but by their own contemporary documents. This provided an unassailable chronological anchor, a skeleton key that unlocked the entire dynastic sequence and proved that China's historical record reached back far deeper into the past than anyone had previously been able to conclusively prove. But the bones did more than just name kings, they chronicled their wars. These inscriptions provide a raw, real-time account of the military pressures that defined the Shang state. We learn the names of their enemies, tribes like the Tufang, the Qiang, and the Gifang, who constantly threatened the kingdom's borders from the north and west. The records are not dry summaries, they are urgent field reports. An inscription might detail, "We raised 3,000 troops to attack the Tufang," or question, "If we call up 5,000 men from the various lands to march against the Gongfang, will we receive assistance?" These are not myths of great battles, they are the logistical realities of a Bronze Age superpower managing its military resources. We see the king consulting the oracles about the timing of campaigns, the loyalty of his allies, and the likely success of a specific general. This transforms our understanding from a vague notion of ancient warfare to a detailed picture of a centralized state capable of mass conscription, strategic planning, and dealing with persistent, named geopolitical rivals, a level of historical detail that is simply unparalleled for such an ancient period. Perhaps one of the most scientifically significant contributions of the oracle bones lies in their celestial records. The Shang diviners were meticulous observers of the sky, and they recorded unusual astronomical phenomena as messages from the high god Dai. Among the most important of these are the notations of solar eclipses. We have inscriptions that state with chilling clarity, the sun was eclipsed, or more specifically, on the day Guoyu, a solar eclipse occurred in the evening. Modern astronomers can calculate the precise paths of solar eclipses backwards through time, when they plug in the dates derived from the Shang's own 60-day cyclical calendar. These ancient observations match up with known eclipses that occurred over the Yellow River Valley in the 13th century BC. This provides an independent scientific cross-check that verifies the Shang chronology with astonishing accuracy. It means the dates we assign to kings like Wu Ding are not just guesswork based on later texts. They are anchored by celestial events that can be computed with mathematical certainty, making the oracle bones one of the most reliable chronological tools for the entire ancient world. Beyond kings, wars, and eclipses, the bones reveal the inner workings of a sophisticated bureaucracy. The very act of divination was a state function, and the meticulous records prove the existence of a highly organized administrative machine. The inscriptions name not only the king but also a roster of official diviners figures like Kuei, Bin, and Zheng, who are high-ranking court officials performing these rituals on a rotating schedule. The records are dated using a complex cycle of 60 days, demonstrating a standardized calendar system used across the kingdom. They document the management of royal estates, the tracking of tributes, and the organization of large-scale hunts that served both as military training and as a source of food for the court. We see references to the many lands that owed allegiance to the Shang king, indicating a form of feudal or tributary system. This isn't the record of a simple tribal chiefdom. It is the documented reality of a complex, stratified, and highly organized state with specialized officials, systematic record-keeping, and a centralized authority that reached far beyond its capital city. The oracle bones, therefore, are the ultimate historical witnesses. They turned the Shang from a line of names in a book into a living, breathing civilization with a government, an army, a calendar, and its eyes fixed on the heavens, giving us a first-hand account of its triumphs, its fears, and its place in the world. But where were these incredible conversations with the cosmos actually taking place? The answer lies in a sprawling, ancient metropolis along the bend of the Huan River, a place we now know as Yingsu, the ruins of Yin. For centuries, its location was a mystery, its name little more than a legend from historical texts. That all changed in the late 1920s when a team of archaeologists from China's newly established Academia Sinica turned their shovels to the earth near the modern city of Anyang. What they began to uncover would far exceed their wildest expectations, revealing not just a few scattered artifacts, but the magnificent, terrifying, and opulent heart of the Shang kingdom itself. This was no ordinary dig site. It was the emergence of an entire capital city from the soil, a discovery that would become the undisputed cornerstone for the scientific study of early Chinese civilization. The scale of Yingsu is almost overwhelming to comprehend. This was not a small village or a fortified outpost. It was a massive, organized urban center that served as the seat of Shang power for over 250 years. The excavations have revealed a city of distinct districts and specialized functions. There were vast workshop areas where master craftsmen cast those breathtaking bronze vessels and weapons, their furnaces burning for generations. There were residential quarters for the nobility and the common people, foundations of palaces that once held towering wooden pillars, and a complex network of roads and drainage systems. Walking through the site today, you can still feel the ghost of this immense metropolitan energy, the echoes of a city that was, for its time, one of the most advanced in the entire world. The sheer size of Yingsu confirmed what the oracle bones had already hinted. This was not a minor chiefdom, but a sophisticated, centralized state with the resources and organization to build and maintain a capital of staggering proportions. Yet, for all the grandeur of its daily life, it was in the city's spaces for the dead that the most spectacular and chilling discoveries were made. The royal tombs at Yingsu are monuments to both supreme power and profound belief in the afterlife. The most famous of these is the tomb of Lady Hao or Fu Hao, a consort of King Wu Ding. Her story is extraordinary because her tomb, miraculously, was found intact, completely untouched by looters. Opening it was like stepping directly into a Shang royal burial chamber that had been sealed for 3 millennia. Inside, archaeologists found a stunning hoard of treasure, over 440 bronze ritual vessels, nearly 600 jade objects, more than 7,000 cowrie shells used as currency, and numerous exquisitely crafted hairpins and bronze mirrors. But the contents also spoke to her unique role. Alongside this wealth were over 130 bronze weapons, including massive battle axes, which, according to the oracle bones, she herself commanded in battle. Lady Hao was not just a royal wife. The inscriptions and her tomb reveal her as a formidable military general and a powerful priestess in her own right, a figure whose real power and status were literally buried with her, waiting to be rediscovered. The tombs of the Shang kings, however, were on an even more colossal and grim scale. These were not simple underground chambers. They were massive, cross-shaped pits dug deep into the earth, accessed by long, sloping ramps. Their scale is a testament to the king's absolute authority, capable of commanding the labor of thousands. But the most haunting aspect of these royal graves is the evidence of human sacrifice that they contain. The Shang believed that in death, the king would need a full court to serve him in the next world. To ensure this, his burial was accompanied by the ritual slaughter of dozens, sometimes hundreds, of human victims. These included prisoners of war, servants, and even loyal retainers who were interred alongside him, in the burial chamber itself, in the access ramps, and in dedicated sacrificial pits nearby. The skeletons found in these pits, often with their heads severed, tell a silent, brutal story of a culture where the king's divine power extended even over life and death, and where the line between honoring the ancestors and absolute brutality was tragically thin. And it was here, in the very shadow of these royal tombs and palaces, that archaeologists made the discovery that tied everything together: the oracle bone archives. These were not random, scattered finds. They uncovered dedicated pits, some containing thousands of inscribed fragments, all carefully stored together. This was the Royal Archive, the equivalent of the National Library and Records Office of the Shang state. The location was critically important. The fact that these divination records were kept so close to the ceremonial heart of the city and the tombs of the kings proves that they were considered documents of the highest importance, essential to the functioning of the kingdom. They weren't discarded after use. They were preserved, stored, and likely referenced. Finding the bones in their original context, right next to the palaces where the kings lived and the tombs where they were buried, created an undeniable physical link between the cryptic inscriptions and the civilization that produced them. The words on the bones now had an address. The fears about military campaigns could be linked to the weapons found in the workshops. The questions about royal hunts could be imagined in the surrounding forests. The rituals for the ancestors could be visualized in the temples whose foundations were now uncovered. The significance of Yingsu, therefore, cannot be overstated. Before its excavation, the Shang Dynasty was, for many scholars in the early 20th century, a debated legend. The discovery of Yingsu provided the material proof. It gave us the cities, the art, the industry, the writing, and the gruesome details of royal power all in one place. It allowed archaeologists to practice what is known as the dual evidence method, where the information from the written oracle bone inscriptions could be directly cross-referenced with the physical evidence unearthed from the ground. An inscription mentioning a great battle led by Lady Hao could now be held alongside the very axes she might have wielded. A record of a royal sacrifice to an ancestor could be studied next to the actual ceremonial vessels used in such rituals. Yingxu transformed the study of early China from a field based on textual analysis into a hard science, grounded in stratigraphy, carbon dating, and material culture. It pulled the Shang Dynasty out of the realm of myth and placed it firmly, irrevocably, onto the map of human history, proving that the whispers from the oracle bones were emanating from a very real, powerful, and complex capital city that once pulsed with life along the banks of the Huan River. Yet for all the incredible detail these bones provide, they also draw very distinct boundaries around our understanding, leaving us with as many tantalizing questions as they provide concrete answers. The oracle bone inscriptions are, by their very nature, profoundly limited. They are not history books written for posterity. They are cryptic, bureaucratic log entries from a royal hotline, terse and formulaic to a fault. Think of them as the ultimate insider's memos, filled with jargon and shorthand that the original writers never intended for outsiders to read. This creates a fundamental asymmetry in our knowledge. We know an immense amount about what preoccupied the king's mind during a divination ritual, but we know staggeringly little about the world outside that sacred chamber. The voices of the common people, the farmers, the soldiers, the artisans who cast those magnificent bronzes, they are almost entirely silent. Their daily struggles, their beliefs, their loves and losses are simply not the kind of information deemed worthy of carving into a sacred turtle shell. We can infer their existence from the context, but we cannot hear their stories, making the Shang civilization a kingdom viewed almost exclusively from the throne room, a portrait of an entire society painted with only the colors found on the king's palette. This royal focus creates a massive blind spot when it comes to the broader philosophical or spiritual worldview of the average Shang citizen. The inscriptions give us the state religion, the official protocol for dealing with Dai and the royal ancestors. But what did an ordinary farmer believe? Did he have his own, more personal set of household gods or local spirits that he prayed to for a good harvest or a healthy child? The bones are silent on this. We have no Shang equivalent of epic poetry, no creation myths, no philosophical texts exploring the nature of the soul or the cosmos. The intricate, beautiful designs on their bronze vessels hint at a rich symbolic language of dragons and abstract patterns, but their precise meanings are lost to us. Were these purely decorative, or did they encode deeper cosmological ideas that everyone understood but no one needed to write down? This lack of a popular voice means we see the Shang through a narrow, elite lens. We witness the grand, state-sanctioned conversations with the divine, but we miss the quiet, personal prayers whispered in the fields and the homes, leaving a fundamental part of the human experience in the shadows. The geographical scope of the Shang kingdom is another area of active debate fueled by the inscription's frustrating ambiguity. The bones frequently mention the many lands that owed allegiance to the king and record military campaigns against various tribes. From this, we know the Shang sphere of influence was significant, centered in the Yellow River Valley. But was this a tightly controlled, centralized empire with defined borders and provincial governors, or was it a more fluid network of alliances and tributary relationships with semi-independent chieftains? The inscriptions don't provide a clear map or administrative manual. They tell us the king sent armies to the north, but not how far his tax collectors traveled or how deeply his cultural norms penetrated into the countryside. The archaeological evidence helps, showing Shang-style bronzes and rituals at sites far from Anyang, but it's often difficult to distinguish between direct political control and the simple spread of a prestigious culture through trade and imitation. The bones give us the headlines of military expansion and diplomatic contact, but they leave the fine print of daily governance and the exact extent of the king's real political power largely to our imagination. Perhaps the most intellectually tantalizing gaps are the ones that exist within the inscriptions themselves, the ambiguous texts that continue to fuel vigorous debates among scholars. For every clear record of a solar eclipse or a successful hunt, there is a fragmentary or cryptically worded inscription that resists easy interpretation. Some characters remain completely undeciphered, their meanings lost because they appear so rarely or in such damaged contexts that there is simply not enough data to crack their code. Other texts are grammatically puzzling, using syntactic structures that don't neatly align with our understanding of classical Chinese. Then there are the cases where the verification seems to contradict the prognostication, leaving us to wonder if the scribe made an error, if the king's interpretation was simply wrong, or if there was a more complex, unstated reason for the discrepancy. These aren't just academic puzzles, they are locked doors in our understanding of Shang thought. A single, misunderstood character could be the key to a whole new aspect of their ritual practice or social structure. This ongoing detective work ensures that the study of the oracle bones is a living, breathing field, where new technologies like digital imaging and database analysis are constantly applied to these ancient texts, hoping to pry loose a few more secrets from their stony silence. So where does this leave us? With a profound sense of gratitude for the incredible window we have been given, tempered by a humbling awareness of its inherent limitations. The oracle bones pulled the Shang Dynasty from the realm of myth into the light of history, but they also cast long, deep shadows across our understanding. They are a powerful reminder that history is not just about the answers we find, but also about the questions that persist. They challenge us to look beyond the official record, to use archaeology, anthropology, and comparative studies to fill in the silences. The bones tell us what the king asked the gods, but the empty spaces on their surface, the stories they chose not to record, speak just as eloquently about the vast, vibrant, and ultimately unknowable human world that thrived beyond the walls of the royal court. Yet for all their profound historical value, the oracle bones also have a darker, more modern secret, a story not of ancient kings but of contemporary greed. The moment these artifacts were recognized for their immense scholarly and cultural worth, they transformed from forgotten curiosities into highly sought-after commodities. Almost overnight, a booming market sprang up, and with it came an inevitable and persistent problem: a flood of clever forgeries designed to deceive collectors and institutions alike. This created a shadowy world where modern fraud intersects with ancient history, challenging experts to become detectives in a high-stakes game of authentication. Distinguishing a genuine 3,000-year-old oracle bone from a clever fake requires a meticulous, multi-layered investigation. One of the first things an expert examines is the patina, the natural surface coating that develops on buried objects over centuries. A real oracle bone possesses a patina that is incredibly difficult to replicate artificially. It's not just a layer of dirt, it's a chemical transformation. The bone becomes mineralized, and the inscription grooves acquire a smooth, harmonious coloration that is consistent with the rest of the artifact. Forgery artists might try to mimic this by applying tea stains, acid washes, or even baking the bone in an oven, but these methods often create a patina that looks either too uniform or unnaturally blotchy. Under magnification, a genuine patina will show a complex, layered history, while a fake one might reveal tiny bubbles, modern tool marks, or pigment that has pooled in the carving grooves in a way that defies natural decay. Next, the expert turns a critical eye to the inscription itself, analyzing both the content and the carving technique. The script of the Shang Dynasty followed very specific grammatical and stylistic conventions that were unknown to early forgers. A fake might contain characters that are historically anachronistic, or it might pose a question that no Shang diviner would ever have asked. The physical act of carving is also a dead giveaway. Authentic inscriptions were made on dry, hard bone using bronze tools, resulting in sharp, crisp lines with distinct starting and ending points. Modern forgers often use power tools or sharp steel implements on softened bone, which can leave telltale signs like microscopic vibration marks, perfectly parallel grooves, or a scooped-out appearance in the character, strokes that ancient tools simply couldn't produce. The flow and confidence of the handwriting are also key. Shang scribes were masters of their craft, carving with a fluid, practiced hand. Fakes often betray a hesitant, uneven, or overly careful stroke, as if the carver was slowly copying from a reference rather than writing from a place of ingrained knowledge. Perhaps the most ingenious and difficult element to fake is the system of cracks themselves. Recall that the cracks were produced by applying heat to carefully drilled hollows, causing a thermal shock that created a unique organic fracture pattern. In a genuine oracle bone, the cracks and the inscription have a logical relationship. The inscription will often be carved to avoid a major crack, or the crack will clearly cut through the inscription, proving it was there first. In a forgery, the faker has to create the cracks artificially, often by striking the bone or using a chisel. These man-made cracks tend to look forced. They might be too straight, too symmetrical, or have a different texture and coloration than a genuine thermal fracture. A trained expert can often see that the cracks in a fake don't behave as physics would dictate, failing to radiate naturally from the prepared hollows or lacking the fine, branching tributaries of a real divination event. The forger is ultimately trying to replicate a moment of sacred, physical chaos, and that is an almost impossibly high bar to clear. The consequences of this forgery epidemic are far-reaching. It has polluted the archaeological record, wasting the valuable time of scholars who must authenticate dubious pieces and muddying the waters of historical understanding. For every genuine bone that surfaces, there might be dozens of fakes circulating in private collections and even making their way into lesser museums. This black market also fuels the looting of authentic archaeological sites, as tomb raiders destroy valuable context in their rush to find sellable artifacts. The story of oracle bone forgeries is a sobering reminder that our desire to connect with the past can sometimes create a destructive and deceitful industry. It forces us to look beyond the immediate allure of an ancient artifact and to appreciate the painstaking scientific work that separates a genuine whisper from the Shang Dynasty from a clever modern lie. While the sharp eyes of scholars rescued the oracle bones from destruction and began the work of decipherment, the 21st century has ushered in an entirely new era of discovery, one powered not by magnifying glasses and intuition alone, but by high-resolution scanners, spectral imaging, and molecular analysis. Modern technology is allowing us to see these ancient artifacts in ways that were previously unimaginable, peeling back layers of time to reveal secrets that have been hidden for millennia. The goal is no longer just to read what is clearly visible. It is to recover what has been lost, to measure what was once intangible, and to understand the very physics of the ritual itself, all without ever touching a fragile, 3,000-year-old surface. One of the most transformative tools in this digital arsenal is high-resolution, three-dimensional scanning. Imagine being able to hold a perfect, weightless, and immortal digital copy of an oracle bone in your hand, to rotate it under virtual light, and to examine every microscopic groove and fracture from any angle without risking the original artifact. This is precisely what 3D modeling offers. Using structured light scanners or photogrammetry, researchers can create astonishingly detailed digital replicas. This technology is particularly revolutionary for studying the all-important crack patterns. On the original bone, a major fissure might obscure a key character, or soot from the ancient fire might cloud the details of a branching line. With a 3D model, a scholar can digitally lift the inscription away from the crack, or use virtual lighting to cast shadows from different directions, revealing the precise depth and trajectory of every single fracture. This allows for a new level of statistical analysis, where thousands of crack patterns can be compared and categorized to finally understand the formal grammar the Shang diviners used to interpret them. Was there a consistent difference between a fortunate and an unfortunate crack? By building a massive digital library of these scanned bones, we can move beyond anecdotal evidence and start to see the systematic rules that governed one of history's most enduring spiritual practices. But what about the inscriptions that have simply faded away, where the carving is so shallow or the bone so stained that it is completely invisible to the naked eye? This is where multispectral and hyperspectral imaging performs what can only be described as digital magic. This technique involves photographing the bone using light from across the electromagnetic spectrum, far beyond the narrow range of human vision. A faint trace of mineral residue in the inscription groove, invisible in ordinary light, might absorb or reflect infrared or ultraviolet light in a unique way. By processing these different images with sophisticated software, researchers can literally make vanished characters reappear on a screen. It's like applying a filter that sees time itself, separating the signal of the ancient carving from the noise of centuries of decay and discoloration. Every year, new characters are recovered using this method, adding missing words to historical records, clarifying the names of forgotten ancestors, and filling in crucial gaps in our understanding of Shang grammar and vocabulary. This technology doesn't just preserve what we have, it actively gives us back what we thought was lost forever. The questions extend beyond the words and cracks to the very materials themselves. Where did these specific bones and shells come from? The answer can tell us volumes about Shang trade networks, resource management, and ritual economics. Modern chemical analysis techniques like stable isotope analysis and trace element analysis provide these answers. By taking a tiny, dust-sized sample from an oracle bone, scientists can measure the unique chemical signature locked within its chemistry. The isotopes in the bone reflect the water and plants the animal consumed, effectively creating a geographic fingerprint. An ox scapula can be traced to the specific region where that ox was raised. A turtle plastron can be identified as coming from a species native to the Yangtze River, hundreds of miles south of the Shang capital at Anyang. This reveals that the Shang were not just using local resources, they were managing a vast supply chain, importing these ritually essential materials from across their known world. The very act of divination was supported by a sophisticated economic system, and the bones themselves are the ledgers. Perhaps the most cutting-edge frontier involves analyzing the tools used in the ritual, not by finding the actual bronze rods, but by reading the chemical shadows they left behind. When a red-hot metal point was applied to the bone, minuscule traces of that metal were fused into the surface. Using a technique called portable X-ray fluorescence, scientists can now non-invasively scan the hollows on the back of the bones and detect the elemental composition of those metallic residues. The results have been startling. Early analysis suggests the presence of copper, tin, and lead, consistent with the bronze alloys the Shang were known to use. But it also opens the door to more nuanced questions. Did different royal workshops use slightly different metal recipes for their divination tools? Could we one day match a specific set of bones to a specific ritual toolkit? This transforms the bones from passive historical records into active participants in the ritual, still carrying the elemental imprint of the fire that made them speak. We are no longer just reading the message, we are analyzing the pen that wrote it. This fusion of archaeology and material science is allowing us to reverse engineer the Shang divination ceremony, understanding it not just as a spiritual act, but as a precise technological and chemical process, a blend of faith, fire, and metallurgy that connected a king to his gods. This brings us to one of the most profound and contentious mysteries in all of Chinese history, a debate that the oracle bones have fueled rather than settled, the question of the Xia dynasty. According to traditional historical accounts, most famously Sima Qian's records of the Grand Historian, the Xia was the glorious first dynasty of China, ruling for centuries before being overthrown by the virtuous founders of the Shang. It's a foundational story, a narrative of moral kings and a lost golden age that has been central to China's understanding of its own origins for over 2,000 years. Yet, when we turn to the one and only contemporary, written source from that general era, the oracle bones themselves, we are met with a thundering silence. The meticulously recorded world of the Shang kings, with its exhaustive lists of ancestors, enemies, and allied tribes, contains not a single unambiguous mention of a preceding Xia dynasty. This absence is the bedrock of a modern scholarly schism, forcing us to ask, were the Xia a real, complex state that preceded the Shang, or were they a powerful political myth, a foundational story invented by later dynasties to legitimize their own rule? The traditionalist perspective, often aligned with a long-standing Chinese historical tradition, holds that the Xia were very much real. Proponents of this view argue that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. They point out that the oracle bones are not a comprehensive history book. They are a specific type of royal document concerned primarily with the immediate spiritual and political concerns of the Shang court. The Shang, this argument goes, had no ritual reason to mention the Xia. Their divinations were directed at their own ancestors and gods, not the lineage of a dynasty they had conquered and supplanted. To expect them to carve the name of their defeated rivals into their sacred bones, this view suggests, is to misunderstand the purpose of the inscriptions entirely. Furthermore, advocates point to ancient texts like the Bamboo Annals and classic works like the Book of Documents, which provide detailed, if legendary, accounts of Xia kings and their achievements. For centuries, these texts were considered reliable history, and for many, the sheer weight of this literary tradition, combined with the discovery of complex Neolithic cultures like the Urartu, provides a compelling, if circumstantial, case for the Xia's existence. On the other side of the debate are the skeptics who see the silence of the oracle bones as deafening and definitive. They argue that if the Xia were a powerful, centralized dynasty that directly preceded the Shang, especially one the Shang supposedly overthrew in a righteous rebellion, we would absolutely expect to see some echo of them in the inscriptions. The Shang recorded the names of virtually every other significant entity in their world. They named petty chieftains, distant tribes, and rivers. Most importantly, they were obsessed with their own ancestors. If the Xia were real and the Shang kings were their political successors, it stands to reason that at least some of the earliest Shang rulers would have been related to the Xia royal line through marriage or blood, making them part of the ancestral pantheon that the Shang were so desperate to appease. The complete lack of any such reference for these scholars is a powerful piece of negative evidence. It suggests that the Xia, as described in later texts, may have been a literary construction, a necessary first dynasty created by Zhou dynasty historians and philosophers to establish a pattern of the mandate of heaven, where corrupt rulers are justly replaced by virtuous ones, a narrative that conveniently legitimized the Zhou's own overthrow of the Shang. The archaeological record has become the primary battleground for this debate, and it revolves almost entirely around a single, enigmatic culture known as Urartu. Discovered in Henan province, the same region that would later become the heartland of the Shang, Urartu was a large, sophisticated, and clearly stratified society that flourished from around 1900 to 1500 BC. It boasts evidence of bronze casting, palatial complexes, and a social hierarchy, all the hallmarks of an early state-level society. Crucially, its timeline places it squarely in the gap between the simpler Neolithic Longshan culture and the rise of the unequivocally complex Shang Dynasty at Urartu and later at Yingzhou. For those who believe in a historical Xia, Urartu is the smoking gun. They see it as the physical manifestation of the Xia dynasty, its capital city and material culture matching the time frame and description of the legendary state. However, the skeptics counter with a critical and still unanswered question: where is the writing? If Urartu was indeed the mighty Xia dynasty, why have we found no writing there whatsoever? The Shang at their apex were producing thousands of inscribed oracle bones. If the Xia were their direct predecessors and possessed a similar level of political and ritual complexity, it is reasonable to expect some form of writing to have existed. The total absence of any written records at Erlitou sites is a significant stumbling block. It forces us to consider that Erlitou might represent a powerful, complex chiefdom or an early proto-state, but not a full-fledged dynasty in the way the Shang clearly were. Without written proof linking Erlitou directly to the name Xia remains an inference, a compelling hypothesis but not a proven fact. The debate, therefore, is stuck in a fascinating loop. The texts describe a dynasty but lack physical proof, while the archaeology offers a plausible candidate but lacks a name. The oracle bones, which could have connected the two, remain obstinately silent, refusing to give up the final, conclusive word on one of China's oldest and most enduring historical mysteries. Let's pull one specific oracle bone from the archives and trace the journey of reading its message together. We'll look at perhaps the most famous example, a plastron fragment catalogued as Heji 6150, which records a divination from the reign of King Wu Ding concerning his military commander and consort, Lady Hao. Here is the full inscription, broken down into its four classic parts: the preface, the charge, the prognostication, and the verification. The preface sets the scene, crack making on Xin Si Day Que divined. This tells us the exact day within the Shang's 60-day cyclical calendar when the ritual occurred and names the court diviner Que, who was responsible for conducting the ceremony. The charge, or the question posed to the spirits, follows immediately. Lady Hao will soon give birth. Will it be fortunate? Now, this seems simple, but every character opens a door into their world. The name Lady Hao, written with characters that signify a title and a personal name, identifies one of the king's most powerful wives. A woman we know from other bones was also a military general and a landowner. The character for give birth is a beautiful and graphic pictograph of a child emerging headfirst. The term fortunate is the same character we see on modern good luck charms, a vessel symbolizing a successful ritual offering. Next comes the king's prognostication, his reading of the cracks. The king read the cracks and said, "If it be on a Ding day that she gives birth, it will be fortunate. If it be on a Zheng day that she gives birth, there will be prolonged luck." King Wu Ding is not just giving a simple yes or no, he is interpreting the intricate fissure patterns to make a conditional prediction. He sees in the cracks a specific omen tied to the sex of the child, linking a birth on a Ding day with great fortune and one on a Zheng day with ongoing prosperity. This level of detail shows the king actively engaging with the divine message, trying to extract nuanced guidance from the bone's cryptic language. Finally, we have the verification, the real-world result that was carved onto the bone weeks later after the event had transpired. After 31 days on Jia Yin Day, she gave birth. It was not lucky, it was a girl. This last line is a punch to the gut, a stark record of personal disappointment that cuts across 3 millennia. The scribe notes that the birth occurred not on a Ding or Zheng day, but on a Jia Yin day outside the king's predicted auspicious window. The verdict, "It was not lucky, it was a girl," reveals the harsh patriarchal priorities of a Bronze Age dynasty. A female child in this context was considered unlucky because she could not carry on the direct patrilineal line essential for performing the ancestral sacrifices that maintain the kingdom's cosmic balance. This single sentence transforms the bone from a ritual object into a deeply human document, capturing a moment of royal anxiety, hope, and ultimate heartbreak. We are not just reading a historical record, we are witnessing a family's private sorrow, a king's failed prophecy, and the immense social pressure for a male heir, all etched permanently into the shell. But our reading doesn't stop with the translated words. To fully appreciate this conversation, we need to look at the physical placement of the text on the bone itself. Oracle bone inscriptions were not written in neat, linear paragraphs. They were carved to flow around the topology of the shell and, most importantly, to acknowledge the sacred cracks. On this particular plastron, you would see the preface and the charge carved neatly in one area. The king's prognostication is often placed adjacent to the charge. The verification, however, is frequently found in a more marginal space, sometimes even written perpendicularly along the edge, indicating it was added later by a different hand. The cracks themselves are the central feature. The text carefully avoids carving through the major fissures. The characters bend and curve to respect these divine marks. This spatial arrangement is a powerful visual metaphor for the entire process. The human words are arranged in submission to the divine message, the cracks being the primary text from the spirits, and the carved inscriptions being the human commentary and record. Seeing this layout helps us understand that we are looking at a completed form, a documented transaction between the human and spirit worlds that was considered closed once the outcome was verified and recorded for the royal archives. These oracle bone inscriptions do more than just record conversations with the gods. They provide us with a remarkably detailed blueprint of an entire social world, a rigidly structured pyramid of power with the king standing alone at its absolute apex. Every aspect of the divination process reinforces this hierarchy. The king isn't merely a participant in these rituals. He is the chief executive and high priest, the only person whose interpretations of the cracks carry the ultimate authority of the state. His title, Wang, appears everywhere, not just as a name but as a symbol of his unique role as the indispensable conduit between the human and spirit realms. When the bone records, the king read the cracks and said, "We are witnessing the moment where his political power and his religious authority become one and the same." His divine mandate to rule was proven and renewed with every successful prognostication, making the oracle bones the ultimate tool of royal legitimacy, cementing his position not just through military might or lineage, but through his perceived monopoly on cosmic communication. Just below the king, the inscriptions reveal a bustling class of elites who formed the administrative and military backbone of the Shang state. These were the royal consorts, the generals, the scribes, and the official diviners whose names are meticulously recorded alongside the king's. Figures like the diviner Que or the scribe Bin were not anonymous functionaries. They were high-ranking court officials, likely from powerful noble families, whose presence in the rituals lent further credibility and bureaucratic order to the proceedings. Perhaps the most striking example of this elite class is Lady Hao or Fu Hao, the consort of King Wu Ding. The bones don't just mention her in passing, they chronicle her life. We learn that she led military campaigns, commanded thousands of troops, and presided over her own agricultural estates. She was a landowner, a general, and a priestess, a figure of immense personal power whose status was derived from her relationship to the king, but was clearly exercised in her own right. Her existence, documented in the bones and spectacularly confirmed by her untouched tomb, shatters any simplistic notion of women being entirely powerless in this society. She represents the upper echelon of the elite, those who operated in the king's inner circle and shared in the exercise of his power, their lives and deeds deemed important enough to be recorded for the ancestors. Yet for every named elite, the inscriptions point to a vast, silent majority, the commoners, the farmers, the soldiers, and the artisans who formed the foundation of Shang society. Their voices are almost completely absent from the bones because their personal concerns were not considered matters of state worthy of divine consultation. We don't hear about their harvests, their family health, or their local disputes. Instead, we see them only as anonymous numbers, as faceless resources managed by the king. The inscriptions frequently mention the mustering of armies, noting, "We raised 3,000 troops," or "We called up 5,000 men from the various lands." These weren't professional soldiers, but likely farmers conscripted to fight the king's wars. Similarly, the management of agriculture, the foundation of the economy, is recorded from the top down. The king divines about the harvest of millet because the entire kingdom's food supply and stability depend on it, but the countless farmers who actually tilled the soil, planted the seeds and battled the elements remain a collective, unnamed force, the human engine that powered the civilization but left no individual mark upon its most sacred records. This social stratification reaches its most brutal and explicit form in the countless records of human sacrifice, a practice that lays bare the absolute value or lack thereof placed on human life within the Shang hierarchy. The inscriptions are chillingly matter-of-fact about this. They record the capture of prisoners from rival tribes like the Qiang and the Tufang, and then detail their ritual execution in staggering numbers. A single inscription might state, "We performed a Zai sacrifice to ancestry with 300 Qiang prisoners," or "We offered 10 captured tribesmen to the river spirit." These individuals were not considered full members of Shang society. They were a resource, a form of ritual currency used to appease the ancestors and gods. They were part of a vast underclass with absolutely no rights, their lives entirely disposable in the service of maintaining the cosmic and political order. The sheer scale of these sacrifices, confirmed by the grisly evidence of mass burial pits at Yingzhou, tells us that the Shang state's power was built not only on spiritual authority and military might but also on a foundation of systematic, ritualized violence that treated human beings as expendable offerings. Ultimately, the oracle bones paint a picture of a society with a deeply ingrained belief in a cosmic hierarchy that perfectly mirrored the social one. Just as the king ruled over nobles who in turn commanded commoners and sacrificed prisoners, the high god Dai presided over nature deities and the royal ancestors who required offerings from their living descendants. This worldview provided a divine justification for the entire social structure. The king's supreme position was natural because he was the son of heaven, the necessary link in the chain. The elites held their privilege because they assisted in this sacred duty. The commoners labored because that was their role in maintaining the kingdom that served the gods. And the captives died because they were outsiders, their lives having value only as a gift to the spirits. The silence of the common people on the bones is therefore as eloquent as the words of the king. It speaks to a world where one's place was fixed, where the concerns of the state, as mediated through the king's divinations, utterly overshadowed the lives of the individuals who constituted it. The social pyramid revealed by the oracle bones is thus a complete and self-reinforcing system, a world order where politics, religion, and social class were inextricably fused, all documented in the stark, unforgiving script of the royal diviners. But this direct line to the divine came with a terrifying price, a dark undercurrent that flows through the inscriptions and reveals the brutal foundations of Shang power. Beyond the questions about harvests and toothaches, the oracle bones contain some of history's most chillingly matter-of-fact records of human sacrifice. This was not a rare or hidden practice, it was a systematic, state-sanctioned institution, documented with the same bureaucratic precision as a military campaign or a royal birth. The Shang worldview demanded constant payment to the spirits, and the most valuable currency was human life. The inscriptions detail two primary categories of this ultimate offering: the large-scale ritual killings to appease angry gods and ancestors, and the elaborate entombments of servants to accompany kings into the afterlife. Both served as a stark, public demonstration that the king's authority was absolute, extending beyond the borders of his kingdom and even beyond the veil of death itself. The scale of these sacrificial rituals is almost incomprehensible to the modern mind. The bones record the capture of prisoners from rival tribes, most frequently the Qiang people, who were then systematically executed in staggering numbers as offerings. An inscription might read, "Crack making on Jia Chen Day we divined. Should we perform a Zai sacrifice to ancestry with 300 Qiang prisoners?" The verification would then coldly state, "We performed the sacrifice with 300 Qiang." The term Zai sacrifice likely refers to decapitation, a method confirmed by the headless skeletons found in mass burial pits at Yingzhou, other methods included burning, drowning, and dismemberment, each tailored to a specific deity. A river god required a drowned offering, while a drought might be countered by burning victims under the scorching sun. These were not acts of frenzied mob violence, but calculated acts of state policy, designed to negotiate with the cosmos. By offering hundreds of lives, the king was demonstrating his immense resources and his willingness to pay the highest possible price to maintain the cosmic balance, a grim form of divine diplomacy where human beings were the principal bargaining chip. This logic of appeasement extended beyond the ancestors to the very forces of nature. The Shang lived in a world animated by spirits, and a flooding river or a failed harvest was seen as a sign of a deity's displeasure. The oracle bones show the king attempting to diagnose and remedy these natural disasters through sacrifice. One particularly vivid inscription questions whether a devastating drought was caused by the anger of a specific mountain spirit, and then records the decision to offer a set number of cattle and human prisoners to that spirit in return for rain. The practice reveals a worldview where the natural environment was not an impersonal force but a collection of powerful, sentient entities that could be bargained with, threatened, and placated through the ultimate gift. The king, by orchestrating these sacrifices, positioned himself as the sole manager of this relationship, the only one with the power and the ruthlessness to keep the raging river or the parched earth in check. Alongside these large-scale public spectacles of power existed an even more intimate form of sacrifice, the ritual burial of servants, guards, and retainers in the tombs of kings and high nobles. This practice was rooted in the belief that the afterlife was a direct continuation of earthly existence. A king would need his full court, his soldiers, his attendants, his charioteers, and his consorts to serve him in the next world. Rather than trusting to fate, the Shang ensured his comfort and authority by taking them with him. The royal tombs at Yingsu provide horrifyingly vivid evidence of this. The central burial chamber of a king would be surrounded by skeletons in various postures. Some were found kneeling in rows as if in perpetual attendance. Others were contorted, suggesting they were buried alive. Chariots were interred complete with their horses and drivers, all sacrificed to accompany the king on his final journey. The psychological impact of this practice on Shang society must have been profound. For the elites, it was a terrifying honor, a demonstration of ultimate loyalty that might be demanded of them or their children. For the common people and prisoners of war, it was a constant reminder of their disposability. The king's power was not an abstract concept, it was a physical reality that could, at any moment, demand your life to serve his cosmic ambitions. This created a culture of absolute submission, where the king's role as the chief diviner and high priest was underpinned by his demonstrated power over life and death itself. The ability to command such sacrifices was the ultimate proof of his connection to the spirit world. He could not only speak to the gods but could also send them messengers, a one-way traffic in human souls that cemented his status as the unrivaled ruler of both the visible and invisible worlds. And so we arrive at the ultimate legacy of these cracked and ancient bones, a legacy that extends far beyond archaeology to touch the very heart of Chinese civilization and identity. The most direct and visible line of inheritance stretches from the angular script carved by Shang scribes to the characters written by over 1 billion people today. This is not a tenuous connection, it is a clear, traceable evolution, a story written in the gradual streamlining of form over millennia. Take the character for Sun. On the oracle bones, it was a circle with a dot in the center, a simple and perfect pictograph. Over centuries of writing, first on bronze and then with a brush on bamboo and silk, that circle squared off for ease of execution, becoming the modern character Chinese letter. The character for Moon, a beautiful crescent shape, straightened into a vertical rectangle Chinese letter. Mountain, with its 3 distinct peaks, flattened into the more abstract but still suggestive form of Chinese letter. You can lay a modern Chinese text next to an oracle bone rubbing, and with a little guidance pick out the ancestors of dozens of common words. This unbroken lineage is almost unparalleled in human history. While the people of Mesopotamia and Egypt today use writing systems completely different from their ancient cuneiform and hieroglyphs, the Chinese script represents a continuous tradition, a cultural thread that connects a teenager texting in Shanghai directly to the diviners of a Bronze Age court. It is a living, breathing chronicle of language itself, proving that the thoughts of the Shang kings were not spoken in a lost tongue, but in the early, formative dialect of a language that still thrives. Beyond the shapes of individual characters, the discovery of the oracle bones delivered something even more profound to the Chinese people: the electrifying validation of a historical tradition that had long been viewed with skepticism by the wider world. For centuries, the great chronicle of early China, Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, was a cornerstone of culture, but its accounts of the Shang Dynasty existed in a scholarly limbo, respected but unproven. Western scholars in the 19th and early 20th centuries, applying their own rigorous standards of evidence, often dismissed the Shang as a mythical prelude, a legendary kingdom without a physical footprint. The unearthing of Yingxu and the decipherment of the oracle bones shattered that skepticism in one of the most dramatic vindications in the annals of history. Here were the names of the kings Wu Ding, Pan Zheng, Zhu Ji, not just listed in a later text but mentioned in their own words, in their own time, on their own artifacts. The chronology, the relationships, the wars, and the ritual practices all aligned with stunning accuracy with Sima Qian's account. This wasn't just finding an ancient city, it was finding the receipt for a civilization, proving that China's written history reached back into the 2nd millennium BC, placing it firmly among the world's oldest continuous civilizations. The impact was seismic. It transformed Chinese historiography from a field that could be questioned into one grounded in irrefutable contemporary evidence, restoring a deep and powerful sense of temporal depth to the nation's understanding of its own past. This validation ignited an immense and enduring wave of national pride. In the early 20th century, a time when China was grappling with internal weakness and foreign pressure, the discovery served as a powerful reminder of the nation's ancient glory and resilience. The oracle bones were not a relic of a foreign culture imposed on Chinese soil. They were an indigenous, homegrown creation, evidence of a sophisticated, powerful, and uniquely Chinese state that had flourished millennia ago. They proved that China's cultural roots were deep, independent, and magnificent. Scholars and the public alike embraced the bones as national treasures, symbols of a heritage that no political turmoil could erase. This pride was not rooted in empty chauvinism, but in the concrete reality of the inscriptions. Every deciphered character was a recovered piece of the national soul, a message from the founders of Chinese civilization saying, "We were here, we were real, and our story is yours." This emotional connection continues today, where the study of the oracle bones is a revered academic discipline, and their imagery is a potent symbol of cultural longevity. They are a touchstone, a source of confidence and identity, reminding the modern nation that its culture has weathered thousands of years of change and remains vibrantly connected to its origins. Ultimately, the legacy of the oracle bones is that they are a living link, not a dead one. They are not merely museum pieces to be glanced at and forgotten. They are the foundational layer of Chinese culture, the very bedrock upon which so much was built. The bureaucratic state, the paramount importance of the family and ancestral veneration, the intricate relationship between the ruler and the cosmos, all of these central pillars of traditional Chinese civilization are there, in nascent form, in the concerns of the Shang kings. The respect for the written word, the art of calligraphy, the very structure of the language itself, all flow directly from this source. When a Chinese person today studies their own language and history, they are, whether they are conscious of it or not, engaging in a conversation that began with the crack of a turtle shell in the court of Wu Ding. The bones closed a 3,000-year gap, making the ancient past feel immediate and personal. They transformed the Shang from spectral figures of legend into historical actors with documented fears and ambitions, giving modern China a tangible, undeniable point of origin. In their silent, stony presence, they carry a dual message, one of incredible antiquity and of continuous life, a reminder that some conversations between a people, their past, and their identity are never truly over. Among the thousands of fragments recovered, a few stand out as true celebrities, the star artifacts that have reshaped our understanding of history in unique and profound ways. One such legendary plastron is known to scholars as Heji 10405, and its inscription delivers a message of celestial certainty that resonates across the ages. This particular turtle shell bears a stark, simple charge. The sun was eclipsed. Is it an omen? But the true power of this record lies in its verification, which confirms the event with chilling clarity. The ancient scribe then carved the prognostication, noting that the king interpreted the ominous shadows as a sign requiring a specific ritual sacrifice to appease the spirits. For centuries, this was just another account of royal divination. Then, modern astronomers entered the story. Using sophisticated software, they can calculate the precise paths of solar eclipses backwards through time with incredible accuracy. When they plugged in the data, accounting for the historical location of the Shang capital and the cyclical dating system on the bone, they found a perfect match. This eclipse was not a myth. It was a real astronomical event that occurred over the Yellow River Valley on June 5, 1212 BC. This single piece of bone provided an unshakable anchor point, a chronological pin that fixed the entire Shang king list to the modern calendar with scientific precision. It transformed Chinese history from a sequence of relative dates into a timeline anchored by celestial mechanics, proving that the Shang were not just watching the earth, but were meticulous observers of the heavens, their fears and rituals forever linked to the cosmic clockwork. For a look at the personal drama of the royal court, few artifacts can compete with the oracle bone that documents the rise and fall of a military campaign. One famous scapular records a divination from King Wu Ding concerning a major offensive against the Tufang, a powerful tribal confederation that constantly threatened the Shang's western borders. The inscription is a masterclass in Bronze Age statecraft. The charge is direct and urgent. If we call upon the armies of the vassal states and our own royal troops to attack the Tufang, will Dai confer victory upon us? This question reveals a king managing a complex military alliance, his authority dependent on the loyalty of subordinate rulers and, ultimately, the favor of the high god. The king's prognostication follows, reading the cracks as auspicious, a divine green light for war. But the most gripping part is the verification added weeks later. It states simply and triumphantly, "We attacked the Tufang and were granted a great victory, capturing their chieftains, their horses, and their chariots." You can almost hear the royal herald announcing the news. This bone is more than a war record, it's a complete story arc. It shows the entire process from anxious planning to triumphant conclusion, revealing the Shang as a military superpower capable of coordinating large, combined armies and waging successful campaigns that expanded their influence and filled their coffers with plunder and prisoners, many of whom would later be named in sacrificial records. It's a stark reminder that the king's spiritual duties were inextricably linked to his role as commander-in-chief, and that the cracks in a bone could determine the fate of thousands. Then there is the bone that gives a voice to a remarkable individual, pulling a powerful woman from the shadows of history. We have already met Lady Hao, the consort of King Wu Ding, but one specific inscription dedicated to her stands apart for its sheer scale and detail. This bone does not record a single question, but an entire series of ritual inquiries focused solely on her health. Over the course of the inscription, the king asks a cascade of increasingly specific questions. Is Lady Hao's illness caused by Father Jai? The cracks are read and the answer seems to be no. Is it caused by Mother Zheng? Again, the answer appears negative. The divination continues, methodically working its way through the pantheon of ancestral spirits, a spiritual diagnosis by process of elimination. The inscription is unusually long, covering the entire surface of the bone with its meticulous, anxious script. What makes this artifact so significant is the window it opens into a royal relationship. The king's persistent, almost frantic questioning reveals a genuine and profound concern for Lady Hao, a woman who is clearly much more than just another wife. This single bone, with its exhaustive spiritual investigation, humanizes the distant king, showing him not as an aloof god-king, but as a worried husband, leveraging the full power of his state religion in a desperate attempt to save someone he deeply cared for. It adds a layer of emotional depth to our understanding of the Shang court that few other artifacts can provide. Finally, we have the oracle bones that challenge our very definitions of writing and record-keeping, the ones with inscriptions of breathtaking length and complexity. Some plastrons are veritable pages from a royal chronicle, containing not just one or two divinations, but a whole series of them, sometimes spanning an entire 60-day cycle. One famous example records a sequence of divinations performed over 10 consecutive days, each one checking on the king's health and the fortune of the coming day. The text winds around the shell in a carefully planned layout, a masterpiece of ancient graphic design. The scribe had to plan the entire composition in advance, ensuring the text would fit and flow logically around the sacred cracks. These lengthy inscriptions demonstrate a fully mature bureaucratic system. They show a court that was not just performing rituals, but was systematically archiving its activities with a meticulousness that would be impressive in any era. They are the equivalent of a bound ledger, a continuous log of state affairs that demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of history, accountability, and the power of the written word to create a permanent memory. These star artifacts are far more than curiosities. They are the foundational documents of Chinese civilization. Each one, from the eclipse recorder to the military bulletin to the medical chart for Lady Hao, adds a unique and indispensable thread to the grand tapestry of the Shang world, proving that history's greatest stories are sometimes written not on parchment, but on the humble surface of a turtle shell. Yet for all the incredible stories these bones have already told us, they are far from exhausted. The field of oracle bone studies is incredibly vibrant, a living discipline where ancient history and cutting-edge technology are converging to answer old questions and pose thrilling new ones. One of the greatest lingering mysteries is simply a matter of volume. We have recovered over 200,000 inscribed fragments, but archaeologists and historians are convinced this is only a fraction of the total archive. The Royal Library of the Shang, buried for millennia, has not given up all its shelves. Major excavations continue at Yingsu and surrounding sites, and every new dig season holds the potential for a monumental discovery. Imagine a pit still sealed, containing thousands of pristine, perfectly preserved plastrons, perhaps from a period of Shang history that is currently poorly represented. Such a find could fill in crucial gaps in the dynastic sequence, introduce us to entirely new royal figures, or provide a complete record of a single, critical year in the life of the kingdom. The hunt for these lost caches is a powerful driver in the field, a tangible hope that the next turn of an archaeologist's trowel could unlock another massive chapter in the story of the Shang. The questions we are asking of the bones we already have are also evolving in sophistication. For generations, scholars have painstakingly classified the crack patterns by eye, trying to discern the visual grammar that the Shang diviners used. It's a monumental task given the sheer number of variations and the subjective nature of visual interpretation. Now, artificial intelligence is offering a revolutionary new lens. Researchers are beginning to use machine learning algorithms to analyze high-resolution 3D scans of thousands of oracle bones. The AI can be trained to measure the cracks with inhuman precision, their depth, their branching angles, their relationship to the prepared hollows, looking for statistical patterns and correlations that are simply invisible to the human brain. Could the AI identify a specific crack signature that the Shang always interpreted as a definitive yes for military campaigns? Could it find a subtle pattern that consistently predicted a poor harvest, regardless of the king's optimistic prognostication? This isn't about replacing scholars. It's about giving them a powerful new tool to see the data in a way they never could before, potentially cracking the code of the cracks themselves and finally understanding the precise visual language of Shang divination. Beyond the cracks, the very ink used to write some of the later inscriptions is becoming a subject of intense study. While most oracle bone texts were carved, a small number have been found with traces of a cinnabar-based ink, a bright red pigment made from mercury sulfide. The existence of these ink inscriptions is a bombshell. It suggests that the primary method of recording a divination might have initially been with a brush and ink, and that carving was a secondary, more permanent method reserved for the most important records. This opens up a world of possibilities. Were there vast archives of Shang documents written on perishable materials like bamboo slips or silk that have long since turned to dust? The oracle bones are what survived by chance, but they may represent only the stone tablet of their bureaucracy, while the everyday paper memos are lost. Analyzing the chemical composition of this ink, its application, and its relationship to the carved lines is a new frontier, one that hints at a much wider literary culture that we can only glimpse indirectly. The international scope of this research is also expanding our understanding. It's no longer a field confined to China. Laboratories around the world are applying their own specialized techniques to the questions posed by the bones. Isotope analysis, perfected by geochemists, is being used to trace the origins of the bones and shells themselves. By analyzing the strontium and oxygen isotopes locked within the bone material, scientists can determine the geological signature of the water and plants the animal consumed, effectively mapping its birthplace. The results are revealing a Shang kingdom with a surprisingly vast reach. Turtle shells found at Yingzhou have been traced to species native to the Yangtze River basin, 1,000 kilometers to the south. This wasn't a local resource, it was a strategically imported commodity, proof of a complex trade network or a tributary system that supplied the ritual heart of the kingdom with its most sacred tools. Every bone was a piece of a larger economic puzzle, and we are only now beginning to assemble it. The biggest questions, however, remain philosophical. We can read their words and map their wars, but can we ever truly understand the Shang mind? Can we comprehend what it truly felt like to live in a world where a toothache was a message from a grandfather's ghost and a crack in a turtle shell could determine the fate of an army? The ongoing research is pushing us closer, moving beyond the what and when to grapple with the why and how. It's a collaborative, global effort that combines the traditional skills of the epigrapher with the high-tech tools of the data scientist and the materials engineer. Each new discovery, each new technological application is like turning up the dial on a dimmer switch, slowly illuminating a world that has been dark for 3,000 years. The conversation with the Shang is not over. In many ways, with these new tools at our disposal, it is just beginning, and the ancient bones are proving to be more talkative than anyone could have ever imagined. So here we are at the end of a journey that began with a sick scholar and a dusty bag of medicine. What started as a chance observation in a Beijing pharmacy has unfolded into one of the most profound archaeological detective stories of all time. A quest that didn't just uncover artifacts, but resurrected an entire civilization from the realm of myth. We've followed the trail from the apothecary's jar to the royal tombs at Yingsu, from the first tentative decipherments of a few characters to reading the intimate diary of a king. We've listened in as King Wu Ding fretted over his wife's childbirth and agonized over a toothache, and we've watched as his diviners cracked turtle shells to determine the will of the gods. The true secret of the oracle bones isn't simply that they contain the oldest Chinese writing. It's that they give a voice to a world that had been silent for 3,000 years. They transform the Shang from a list of names in an old book into living, breathing people with fears, ambitions, and a complex worldview, allowing us to understand the mind of a Bronze Age king not as a historical abstraction, but as a man grappling with the same fundamental human concerns that we do today, just through a vastly different lens. This story is a powerful reminder of the fragile threads that connect us to the past. Think of all the moments that had to align for this to happen. The pharmacist who sold the dragon bones, the sharp eye of Wang Yirong, the patient work of generations of scholars, and the sheer luck that kept countless fragments from being ground into powder and swallowed. It underscores a humbling truth. History is not just what is written in grand chronicles. It is also what survives by chance in the earth, waiting for a curious mind to recognize its significance. The oracle bones are a testament to the enduring power of the written word, a power so potent that even a few characters carved into a fragment of shell can bridge a chasm of millennia, allowing us to eavesdrop on the most private conversations between a king and his gods. As we close this chapter, we want to turn the question back to you. For a moment, step into the shoes of a Shang diviner. The bone is prepared, the hot bronze rod is ready. You have one chance to ask the spirits a question that will be carved for eternity. What would you ask? Would you seek guidance on a grand historical scale, inquiring about the fate of a great empire or the cause of a forgotten catastrophe? Or would your question be more personal, a plea for the health of a loved one or insight into your own destiny? The beauty of the oracle bones is that they capture the full spectrum of human inquiry, from the geopolitical to the deeply intimate. We'd love to hear what you would ask. Share your question for the oracle in the comments below. Let's see what mysteries our collective curiosity might unlock. And if you've enjoyed this journey into the heart of one of history's greatest enigmas, be sure to subscribe. We have many more historical mysteries to unravel together, from lost cities to undeciphered codes, each one a new opportunity to hear the whispers of the past.